Hey guys, welcome back to Wacky Reddit Stories. This one is absolutely insane, so sit tight because this is about to get wacky. So I, 17F, was never particularly close with my father. Dad was always the quiet, stoic type, the kind of man who buried himself in work and only emerged for family dinners and forced small talk. Mom, on the other hand, was vibrant, the kind of woman who lit up every room she walked into. They'd been together since college, a classic high school sweetheart story. And for as long as I could remember, they were the definition of couple goals. That's why I was absolutely gutted when I saw my dad with another woman. It happened last Saturday. Mom was away visiting Grandma, who had just had surgery, and I decided to skip hanging out with my friends to study for finals. Dad said he was going to the office to catch up on some work, but he wasn't fooling me. He was acting weird all morning, jumpy, checking his phone every 5 minutes, and constantly glancing at the clock. His eyes kept darting to the window as if he was expecting someone, and he was pacing the living room like a caged animal. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling, convincing myself that I was just overthinking. But then, a couple of hours later, I decided to take a break from studying and head to the local coffee shop. That's when I saw them, Dad and some woman I didn't recognize, sitting in a corner booth, leaning in close and laughing like old lovers. Her hand was on his arm, and the way she looked at him, it was more than friendly. My heart sank, and my stomach twisted into knots. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. She was holding a small envelope. Dad took it, and they exchanged a glance that was so intense it felt like they were sharing a secret. I wanted to burst in there and confront them. But I couldn't. I felt frozen, like my feet were glued to the ground. Instead, I pulled out my phone and snapped a quick photo, zooming in just enough to capture Dad's face, the woman's hand resting on his thigh, and the envelope she was handing him. Then I ran out of there as fast as I could. Back home, I paced my room, my mind racing. How could he do this to Mom? How could he do this to us? I kept staring at the photo, every detail burning into my brain. I had to tell Mom. She deserved to know the truth. But when she called that night to check in, I couldn't bring myself to say it. She sounded so tired and worried about Grandma that I didn't have the heart to dump this bombshell on her. I felt sick. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The image of Dad and that woman kept replaying in my mind. Her perfectly manicured nails dragging across his arm, the way they leaned into each other, the secret smiles they shared. But then, something even more disturbing happened. The next morning, I noticed Dad's car parked down the street instead of in our driveway. He was sitting inside, talking on the phone, his hand gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. I crept see a couple of hours later. I decided to take a break from studying and head to the local coffee shop. That's when I saw them, Dad and some woman I didn't recognize, sitting in a corner booth, leaning in close and laughing like old lovers. Her hand was on his arm, and the way she looked at him, it was more than friendly. My heart sank, and my stomach twisted into knots. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. She was holding a small envelope. Dad took it, and they exchanged a glance that was so intense it felt like they were sharing a secret. I wanted to burst in there and confront them, but I couldn't. I felt frozen, like my feet were glued to the ground. Instead, I pulled out my phone and snapped a quick photo, zooming in just enough to capture Dad's face, the woman's hand resting on his thigh, and the envelope she was handing him. Then I ran out of there as fast as I could. Back home, I paced my room, my mind racing. How could he do this to Mom? How could he do this to us? I kept staring at the photo, every detail burning into my brain. I had to tell Mom. She deserved to know the truth, but when she called that night to check in, I couldn't bring myself to say it. She sounded so tired and worried about Grandma that I didn't have the heart to dump this bombshell on her. I felt sick. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The image of Dad and that woman kept replaying in my mind, her perfectly manicured nails dragging across his arm, the way they leaned into each other, the secret smiles they shared. But then, something even more disturbing happened. The next morning, I noticed Dad's car parked down the street instead of in our driveway. He was sitting inside, talking on the phone, his hand gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. I crept closer, crouching behind the mailbox to eavesdrop. "No, I can't tell her yet," he said, voice tense and low. I need more time. If she finds out, it's over. My blood ran cold. Was he talking about Mom? Was he planning to leave us? Or was he talking about the woman in the photo? I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something I was missing, some piece of the puzzle I hadn't connected. That night, I decided to go through Dad's office. I knew it was wrong, but at that point, I was desperate for answers. I searched through drawers, files, and his laptop. Most of it was mundane. Work reports, bills, insurance documents. But then I found it. A small red velvet box tucked away in the bottom drawer. Inside was a diamond bracelet with a card that read, "For the woman who means the world to me." I felt like I was going to be sick. Was this for her? Was Dad planning to leave Mom for this woman? Or worse, was he giving it to her while still staying with Mom? I couldn't think straight. Everything felt like it was falling apart. And then, as if the universe wasn't done torturing me yet, I saw something else. A letter on his desk, addressed to me. It was sealed, but my name was scrawled on the front in Dad's unmistakable handwriting. I didn't open it. I couldn't. Whatever was in that letter, I wasn't ready to know. Not yet. I spent the next few days walking around in a daze, feeling like my entire world had been turned upside down. I didn't know how to look at Dad anymore. Every time I saw him, I saw that woman's hand on his thigh, the way he leaned into her like he couldn't get enough. And that envelope, what was in it? Money? A love letter? Divorce papers? Then, one night, everything came crashing down. Mom came home from visiting Grandma earlier than expected. She was exhausted, her eyes heavy with dark circles, but she seemed relieved to be back. As soon as she walked in, she hugged me tight, and I felt a pang of guilt so sharp it almost made me cry. I decided it was time. I had to tell her. I couldn't keep this secret any longer. After dinner, while Dad was out in the garage, I pulled Mom aside and showed her the photo. Her reaction was nothing like what I expected. She stared at the image, her eyes darting over every inch of the screen. Then, she burst into tears. But it wasn't the kind of angry, betrayed crying I was expecting. It was relief? "Mom," I said, completely confused, "why are you crying?" "Oh, honey," she said, wiping her tears away. "I have to tell you something." My heart pounded in my chest as Mom took a deep breath and said the words that would change everything. "Your father has been secretly meeting with a private investigator." My jaw dropped. "What? Why?" "For the past 6 months," Mom said, her voice shaking, "he's been looking for your biological mother." I felt like the ground had just disappeared beneath me. "My what?" Mom nodded. "You're adopted. We always planned to tell you, but things got complicated. The woman in that photo is the private investigator, and she just found her." My head spun, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. I was adopted? And the woman I saw wasn't Dad's lover. She was the one who had found the woman who had given me up? And that envelope, it was filled with documents, records, and a photo of my biological mother. "Why didn't you tell me?" I choked out, tears streaming down my face. "Because we were scared," Mom said. "We didn't know how you'd react. And your father, he didn't want to lose you." That night, I confronted Dad again, and this time, he told me the whole truth. It turns out, my biological mother had been looking for me for years but had only recently managed to track me down. Dad had been trying to confirm her identity, to make sure she wasn't some scam artist before telling me. And the phone call I overheard. He wasn't talking to the investigator, he was talking to my biological mother, the woman who had given me up at birth. But the twist didn't end there. The letter I found in Dad's office? It was from her, my biological mother. It was a long, rambling letter explaining why she had given me up and why she had been searching for me all these years. But there was one part that made my blood run cold. "I hope you can forgive me, but your father, he never knew, he was never told. He doesn't know you exist." My biological father was still out there, completely unaware that I even existed. And Dad had known this too. He had known and kept it from me. That's why he was so anxious. That's why he was stalling. He wasn't just afraid of me finding out about my biological mom. He was terrified that my biological dad might find out too. I felt a rush of shame, guilt, and overwhelming relief. Dad wasn't a cheater. He was just trying to protect me, and in his own way, protect the only family I'd ever known. But as much as I tried to understand, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie. And the truth? Well, it was more complicated than any betrayal I could have ever imagined. The days that followed felt like I was living in a fog. Every time I tried to process what Mom and Dad had told me, a new question would surface, each one heavier than the last. My biological mother was out there. My biological father had no idea I existed, and Dad had known all of this for months. Mom and Dad kept trying to talk to me, to explain, but all I could do was nod and pretend to listen. I couldn't look at them without feeling a mix of anger and betrayal. They weren't the people I thought they were. Nothing was what I thought it was. Then, a week after the big reveal, a letter arrived in the mail. It was addressed to me, the return address unfamiliar. My hands shook as I opened it, my heart racing. Inside was a single, folded piece of paper with a note written in shaky, almost illegible handwriting. I know who you are, and I know who your real father is. There was no signature, no further explanation, just that single, cryptic sentence. I felt the room spin as the words echoed in my mind. Someone knew. Someone out there knew the truth. And they wanted me to know that they knew. I showed the letter to Dad, my voice trembling. He read it twice, his jaw clenched, his eyes darkening with an expression I'd never seen before. "Who sent this?" I demanded. "What does it mean?" Dad took a deep breath, but before he could answer, the doorbell rang. We both jumped, exchanging a look before Dad moved toward the door. When he opened it, a man stood on the other side. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. "Hello," he said, his voice deep and calm. "I'm looking for my daughter." My stomach dropped. I knew, even before he said the words. The resemblance was undeniable. The dark eyes, the strong jawline, the way he looked at me with a mix of curiosity and something darker, something that sent a chill down my spine. "You're her, aren't you?" he said, his gaze fixed on me. "You're my daughter." Dad stepped forward, his fists clenched. "You need to leave. Now." "Not until I get answers," the man said, his eyes narrowing. "Did you know she existed all these years? Did you keep her from me?" "We need to talk inside," Dad said, his voice low and threatening. The man smirked, his eyes still locked onto mine. "You don't get to decide that anymore." And that's when I saw it. The envelope in his hand. Identical to the one I had seen Dad with. The one that held the letter from my biological mother. But this one was addressed to him. My biological father. "You kept her from me," he said, his voice breaking. "You lied to me." Dad's face fell, and for the first time in my life, I saw real fear in his eyes. Because whatever he was hiding, whatever secrets he'd kept, they were about to come crashing down, and this time there would be no escaping the truth.